Okay, now you're all off of the hook for mandatory answers. Panel, you are off of the hook for mandatory answers for this question. And I'm going to direct this one to Tony and then anybody else. Tony, I've said a lot that you go just about anywhere evangelicals are talking about the same things. We're talking about sex issues, gender issues, political issues. Yesterday in our panel, you said in 20 years, we'll be talking about different issues. What are some of the issues that evangelicals are going to talk about in the future that they're really not talking much about now? I'm not saying utter silence, but really not talking much about now. What are some of the future conversations these particularly younger folks are going to be part of?
What I said yesterday on the panel was that in 20 years, the question about what do we do with the gay people will have an answer. And a consensus will have formed. There will still be people on the margins who disagree with that answer, but there will be a consensus and we'll move on to other things. And my joke was we'll be debating whether clones should have their own churches or we should let androids marry humans or whatever. But honestly, probably there will still be questions about sexuality. I think we'll become more aware of the spectrum of sexuality that we have as human beings, and even that it's not so quite cut and dry between two genders all the time with every human being, between a male and female. I also think that we're probably right on the brink of some scientific discoveries, both in quantum physics and in biology, that will probably recast everything we think of, like what it actually means to be human. So what do I know? And if it becomes, when it becomes possible, that we take all of the electronic signals in my brain and somehow translate them into ones and zeros, and can store them on some external device outside of me, is that device me? Or where do I end and where does my computer begin? And so what that means for us as Christians is, if we believe in the doctrine of the Imago Dei, that we're created in the image of God, and suddenly we're kind of backpedaling about what it means to be human, that's going to cause one of the most significant doctrines that we hold on to be discussed.
Implications of scientific discoveries on our understanding of what it means to be human. Great answer. Okay, anybody else? That's open to a couple of other folks.
Yeah, let me respond to that as well. Just to bring up another side that's not in, perhaps in tension, but certainly not in disagreement with that. One of the things that's already happening, that's already changing the conversation, and this was alluded to a moment ago. Who are evangelicals now and who are they going to be in the coming generations? We can answer this question in part now. 80% of the Christians in the world right now are not white. English is not their first language, and they're not Protestant. Almost all of our theological education and the way we talk about Christianity and evangelicalism is a form of synecdoche, a form of mistaking the part for the whole. If we were going to address the reality of Christianity as it's now distributed in the world, this would change our conversations tremendously. We would be talking about what it means for Africans to grapple with questions of whether or not they pour alcoholic beverages on the ground and honoring their ancestors. I was in West Africa a couple of months ago. It's a live question. I've been in South America where the questions of animal sacrifice are very much alive. And they look at us and say, postmodernity is your problem, not ours. That's your fight. It does not make any sense to me. The questions that we get obsessed with are not the questions that Christians around the world are always asking. And part of our task is to learn to listen, but I also think that this, and my answer to the future tense of this question, is that we're simply going to have to, because immigration is going to change our world very, very quickly. I live in Dallas. It's not the white redneck town I grew up in. It's one of the largest centers of Nigerian immigration, Ghanaian immigration, Indian, Asians who are coming in for jobs, technology. And I think one of the questions that evangelicals are going to have to face very bluntly that they're not addressing right now is how do we relate to other Christians who are also self-identified as evangelicals but do not share our sense of genealogy, may really not care about the Reformation, who will read the scriptures in very different languages than we do, and will challenge the easy use of some of our linguistic habits. Like, we don't really have any problem with using the word God. We know that somebody at some point, sometime about the 7th century, a Latin-speaking missionary had to show up in a Saxon-speaking part of the world and figure out what to do with Davis. So now we're going to start hearing terms Dao in Chinese, or Shangti, or Tianqiu in Chinese, or other terms, and wonder, well, how do we talk about God now? So I think the theological challenges are going to go very much to the core of what we're being faced with, because the linguistic challenges are going to go to the core, and English is not going to sustain the supremacy or any pretension to the supremacy that it has. And that's going to, I think, have as much of an effect, and it may be more of an apocalyptic effect than the scientific effects that Tony's describing. And these are both possible, and not incompatible with one another. But we could be facing some more cataclysmic changes than changes that are just explicable in terms of progress of technology, etc. Kind of an implosion, perhaps, as well, culturally.
Anybody else want to try that one? Go ahead.
When we talk about what are the issues we're going to be talking about 20 years from now, the general rule of thumb is that Christians talk about issues 20 years after the world talks about it. So whatever the world is talking about now is what we're going to be talking about 20 years from now. In fact, just a side note on this, a little while ago I was Googling the word postmodernity just to see what would come up. The first 10 entries for postmodernity was about the Christian response to postmodernity. I have 3 friends who teach in philosophy departments in secular university. They say now what the American Christian obsession with postmodernity, what philosophers now look at this as a historical event. They read the postmodern philosophers as history rather than as anything that is futuristic. So just for us to realize how backwards we oftentimes are. So what I would project for us is, if we were to look ahead 20 years, I would say, and this goes back to what Patrick was saying, the power dynamic of global Christianity is going to become a major issue, and it will be for the next 20 years. If all the projections are correct, that 80% of the Christians in the world are going to be non-white, yet 99% of the ecclesial, economic, political power of Christianity is still in the West among the whites. So what would happen if that starts to shift? What would happen to white Christians who all of a sudden realize, wait, we're not just the majority, but we don't have the power to dictate the terms of the Christian conversation globally anymore. So that would mean that white evangelicals would have to rethink what that looks like, and we see this in the Episcopal Church, where we're seeing many white Anglicans saying, we're going to put ourselves under the authority of the African Anglican Church. Now what happens if that starts happening in larger waves, so that Presbyterians in the US, PCUSA, start saying our denominational affiliation is going to be with the Presbyterian Church in Korea and not to PCUSA here in the United States. What happens when those things start happening in larger numbers? That's going to change completely how we view the power dynamic in global Christianity. That's, I think, what we need to talk about for the next 20 years.
Join the discussion at PROFRAH.com.